The sun rose gently over the village of Zuberi, casting golden light on the dusty paths and thatched roofs. In this quiet place where tradition ruled and water was sacred, Nia lived with her grandmother in a crumbling hut near the edge of the maize fields. Nia had always been bright-eyed, quick-tongued, and unafraid to question what others simply obeyed. And that was why trouble came. She had seen him, the elder's son, take food meant for the orphans and hide it under his cloak. She had spoken boldly in the marketplace calling out the theft. No one backed her. The villagers turned their faces away. The elder, a man of great pride and louder punishments, declared Nia a liar. He would not have his son's name tarnished by a girl with a mouth too sharp. As punishment he handed Nia a broken clay pot, old, cracked and full of holes. He ordered her to fetch water from the sacred spring each morning as the village watched. Let her carry shame on her back, he said. Let her see how far her words will go when even water does not trust her. Nia bit her lip and said nothing. Her grandmother wept that night, but Nia only wrapped her fingers around the pot and whispered, "Let's see what truth flows." At dawn she set out. The spring lay beyond the fields and past the stone path, a full hour's walk. As she reached the spring, cold and clear under a tree that sang with birds, she knelt and filled the broken pot. Water rose through the cracks but none fell. Not a drop. She stood up slowly, blinking. The holes were still there. The pot clearly fractured. Yet it held the water, shimmering as though in defiance of logic. She walked back, expecting any moment to feel the warmth of leaking water on her legs. But nothing spilled. Villagers lined the path, whispering, waiting to mock her soaked dress, the dripping trail. Instead, silence grew. They saw the full pot resting against her back, not a trace of moisture on the ground behind her. Some thought it a trick, others a fluke. The elder frowned deeply but said nothing. The next day it happened again. And again. For a full week, Nia carried water in the broken pot. Each time, the water clung to the vessel as though bound by a force no one could see. Children began walking behind her, testing the path with dry fingers. Even the elders' wives looked on in puzzled awe. Whispers began to rise like wind before a storm. Is it magic? Is the pot cursed, or blessed? Is the girl? One evening, a man named Toba approached her as she returned from the spring. He was an old potter, known for crafting ceremonial vessels for the village. He squinted at the pot. "This pot," he murmured, "was one I threw away 20 seasons ago. I left it shattered by the river. How did it return to form?" Nia didn't answer. She didn't know. The elder's son sneered when he saw the attention shift. He walked to her and tried to snatch the pot from her back. As his hands grabbed its rim, the pot trembled. A sudden splash soaked only him, a burst of water that stained his robes and left the ground around Nia bone dry. He backed away red-faced, shouting that she was cursed. But now no one laughed at her. The villagers had seen. They had started to believe. On the 10th day the elder himself summoned Nia. She stood in the center of the square, surrounded by villagers. The pot was placed beside her. The elder asked, "What have you done? Is this witchcraft?" Nia looked him in the eye. Her voice was soft, steady. "I told the truth. The water knows." Gasps swept through the crowd. Her words cut through the doubt like a blade through cloth. For a moment even the elder seemed unsure. A soft voice rose from the crowd. It was the orphan girl who had cried from hunger weeks ago. "She told the truth," she said. "He took our food." More voices joined. A merchant spoke. A servant. Even one of the elder's councilmen looked down, ashamed. The truth spread like cracks through dry earth. The elder's son fled that night and no one stopped him. The broken pot was placed on the village altar. Elders called it the vessel of truth. But Nia did not need monuments. She kept walking to the spring each morning, the same path, the same pot. She said little but everyone watched her now, not with ridicule but reverence. One morning the pot finally cracked completely and split in two. The water spilled into the dust, forming a shape like wings. Nia only smiled. "Truth carried me far enough," she whispered. "The rest I'll walk alone." And so she did. In time they stopped calling her the girl with the broken pot. They called her the girl who never let truth fall. The sun rose golden over Zuberi, casting long shadows on the cracked earth and dusty trails that wound through the village like forgotten braids. Each morning Nia walked to the spring with her broken pot, the same pot that should have spilled every drop but never did. And each morning the crowd of curious eyes watching her grew. But not all eyes watched with wonder. The girls her age, strong-limbed and sharp-tongued, began to murmur behind cupped palms. They walked in clusters, carrying perfect pots, their laughter light and mocking. "There she goes," one girl sneered. "The cracked pot that carries magic." "No, not magic," another said with a smirk. "She made a deal with the water spirits. That's why her pot doesn't leak. She's cursed." "Or lying," said a third. "Maybe the pot isn't broken at all. It's all an act." Nia heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply walked. But inside, her heart ached in the way only loneliness can twist a person's bones. She didn't blame them. She might have laughed too once, before the punishment, before the spring began whispering her name. Still she kept walking. At the spring the air felt different. Cooler. Still. The bubbling of the sacred waters echoed like old songs on stone. And it was there, just beyond the splash of the stream, that the older women gathered. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't mock her. They watched. Mama Kalima stood among them, the eldest woman in the village, her back bent like a drawn bow, her eyes dark as river clay. Her fingers were gnarled but strong. She had fetched water from this spring for more years than anyone could count. She said little. But when she looked at Nia, something passed between them. Not fear. Not scorn. Recognition. That morning, as Nia dipped her broken pot into the spring, one of the girls laughed loudly behind her. "Maybe she'll walk on the water next." The women didn't laugh. Mama Kalima narrowed her eyes and whispered, "The water knows." Another woman blinked. "What did you say?" "I said the water knows. It remembers." "Remembers what?" Kalima didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly, her walking stick tapping the stone in rhythm with the heartbeat of the land. She came to Nia, who stood holding the full, unspilled pot. Silence spread like ripples on a still pond. "Child," Kalima said softly. "Who taught you to walk like that?" Nia blinked. "No one," she replied. "Who gave you this pot?" "They gave it to shame me." Kalima leaned in, eyes narrowing. "But the water did not shame you." "No," Nia whispered. "It carried me." Kalima nodded once and touched the side of the pot. It trembled beneath her fingers, though there was no wind. "I've seen this once before," Kalima murmured. "Long ago. When I was a girl." The other women leaned closer. "There was a woman. We called her Sister of the Spring. She too carried water in a cracked pot. The men mocked her. Said she was mad. But every time she came to the well, the ground beneath her turned green even in drought." "What happened to her?" someone asked. "She left. Walked into the hills and never returned. But the spring she bathed in still runs sweeter than the rest. The water remembers." They fell silent again. Behind them, the girls still gossiped and giggled, but softer now, glancing over their shoulders. That evening word began to travel like smoke. Some said Nia was the descendant of the Sister of the Spring. Others whispered that the water itself had chosen her, that it listened when she walked, that it curled around her to keep from falling. Old men shook their heads, dismissing it all, but they too stopped to stare when Nia passed. The next morning, Kalima waited at the spring before dawn. She called Nia over as she arrived. "I want you to try something," she said, handing Nia a second pot, whole, smooth, flawless. "Why this?" Nia asked. "Because this time I want to see if it's the pot that holds the magic, or you." They filled both pots. Nia held one in each hand and began to walk. Halfway down the path, the perfect pot leaked. It was old, and a crack that no one had seen split down its side, leaving a trail behind her. But the broken pot, Nia's pot, held every drop. Kalima watched. Her breath caught. "It's not the clay," she whispered. "It's the truth inside it." From that day on, the whispers changed. The giggles stopped. The girls who once mocked Nia now walked behind her in silence, watching the dry path she left. And Mama Kalima, when asked if it was witchcraft, only smiled and said, "Witchcraft? No. Wisdom." She would sit by the spring, eyes closed, humming old songs under her breath, and when anyone asked about the girl with the broken pot, she'd only say, "The water knows what we forget, who is broken and who holds the truth." And in the village of Zuberi, where water was sacred and truth often punished, that whisper became something deeper than rumor. It became belief. On the sixth day something changed. Nia didn't notice it right away. The morning air felt the same, still and dry, with a light mist clinging to the edges of the trees. She lifted the broken pot as always, her fingers curled gently around its rough handle. The crack along its side was wider now, more defiant. And still not a single drop had ever spilled. But as she stepped onto the familiar dirt path to the spring, she paused. There was no sound. No crunch of gravel beneath her feet, No flap of cloth from her skirt, not even the echo of her breath bouncing off the trees. Just silence. Strange, full silence. She took another step. Again, nothing. It was as though the earth itself swallowed her footfalls, softened them, honored them. She paused and looked up. The path ahead looked the same, but then she noticed the bend. It curved differently now, slightly favoring her side. The tree that once blocked a section of the sun had leaned just enough to cast a shadow across her way. The thorns that scratched her ankles were gone, or perhaps they had bent back as she approached. She walked on, slower this time. A bird called once, then hushed. A rabbit darted from the bush, paused, and bowed its head before disappearing. Her heart raced, but not from fear. Something was happening, something sacred, something she couldn't explain. And then she felt it. A faint vibration at her side. The pot. It was humming. Not loudly, but like a distant lullaby, like someone far away singing underwater. The hum seemed to come from deep within the clay, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. She stopped and lifted the pot close to her ear. Yes, it was real. The water inside wasn't just water. It moved with rhythm, not sloshing randomly as before, but turning, slowly, purposefully, like it was listening to something. Or, like it was waiting. She pressed her palm against the crack. Warmth. Not heat from the sun, but warmth from within, as though the water had chosen to stay. As if it knew her. As if it too had heard her cries the day she was sentenced. As if it remembered her silence. Nia whispered, "Why me?" The wind stirred the leaves. There was no answer. But somehow she felt heard. By the time she reached the spring, the silence had grown even deeper, not empty but alive. She dipped the pot in as always. The crack yawned wider under the water's weight. And still, when she lifted it, not a single drop fell. As she turned back down the trail, Nia noticed something behind her. No footprints. No water. No echo. Just the shape of a girl moving forward, held by a world that had begun to walk with her. Let me know when you're ready for the next part, bro. Here is the full 500-word expansion, 4 footsteps that don't echo. By the 6th day, Nia no longer looked at the cracked pot with dread. She lifted it as always, carefully, steadily, but now there was something else in her movements, a quiet knowing. She stepped onto the path that led from the village to the spring, but this time she stopped after only a few steps. The sound was gone. No rustle of grass beneath her toes, no crunch of dried soil, no thud of her heel against the earth. It was as if her feet no longer touched the ground, or rather, the ground welcomed them too gently to resist. She took another step. Still nothing. No echo. No sound. She blinked, heart fluttering. Was she dreaming? No. The wind was real on her face. The weight of the pot was still on her head. The morning sun still painted everything gold. And yet, her footsteps had vanished. The path too looked different. It wasn't straight like it used to be. It curved now, just slightly, but enough that she noticed. It curved away from a thorn bush that had once scraped her arms and toward the shade of a tree that never used to lean. It was as if the land had grown considerate. She kept walking, her eyes scanning her surroundings. A butterfly flew past her ear and paused in midair, hovering longer than it should have, wings twitching like it was trying to listen. A small lizard darted across her path and stopped, not in fear but in stillness, then turned and slipped aside gently, almost reverently. And then she felt it. A soft, low hum. Not in the air. Not in the wind. But in the pot. She steadied her steps and shifted it slightly on her head. The sound grew stronger. Not a noise really, more like a vibration. A rhythm, slow and steady like breathing. Like heartbeat. It came from inside the pot, from the water. Nia lowered the pot and held it in her hands, staring at the deep crack along its side. She pressed her fingers to it. Warmth. Not heat from the sun, but warmth like skin, like touch, like something alive. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled. The water was not merely staying, it was holding itself. Choosing. And somehow it was choosing her. She whispered, "You're not just water, are you?" The pot pulsed gently in her hands, and she swore she saw the reflection of her own face ripple back, serene, whole, unwavering. She looked around. The trees stood tall but bent inward slightly, their shadows falling perfectly over her. The grass parted before her. Even the stones seemed to have shifted off the path. The world, she realized, was walking with her now. And as she returned to the village, not a drop spilled. Not a sound echoed. Just the hush of something ancient watching, waiting, and listening. That night, Nia lay curled on her mat, the broken pot beside her bed, still full with spring water. The village air was thick and humid, clinging to her skin like a second layer. Crickets sang from the trees, and distant drums echoed softly across the hills. She drifted to sleep with a strange feeling in her chest, something between fear and wonder. Her dreams were unlike any she'd ever known. She stood by the spring, but it no longer looked the same. The water glowed faintly like starlight trapped beneath the surface. Mist floated above it, rising in spirals, forming shapes that moved and shimmered. Then the mist parted. A child emerged first, small and barefooted, with skin like moonlight and eyes the color of deep river pools. The child said nothing, only stared, blinking slowly. Others followed. An old woman with hair like flowing streams, beads of water woven through her locks, her fingers dripping endlessly as if the rivers themselves never left her touch. Behind her, twin boys ran circles around Nia's feet, laughing without sound, their laughter vibrating through the ground like distant thunder. Nia opened her mouth to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. She looked down, her feet were wet though the ground was dry. The water was inside her now. The old woman stepped forward, her voice low and layered, like many voices speaking at once. "When the ground cracks, pour us in," she said. Nia furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" The water child took her hand. "You'll know." The twins whispered in unison. "The pot does not carry water. It carries memory." She blinked, confused. "Whose memory?" "The land's." "Yours." "Ours." "The ones forgotten." The spring behind them shimmered again. Images floated up like reflections. A boy crying under a tree, a woman hiding bread beneath her skirt, a girl falling while running down the hillside. Nia's memories, small and quiet and unimportant to everyone but her. She gasped. "You see me?" The water answered in ripples. "We always have." The old woman cupped her face, her wet hands surprisingly warm. "Wake now, child. Keep listening. The ground will speak soon." A rumble shook the dreamscape. A crack spread beneath Nia's feet. Then she was falling, into the water, into the dark. And she woke. She sat upright in her hut, her body damp with sweat, heart pounding as though it had run all night. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but the room was still. She looked to the side. The broken pot sat where she had left it. Still cracked. Still full. She reached out a trembling hand and touched its rim. Cold. Real. She rose and stepped outside. The moonlight bathed the village in silver. All was quiet, too quiet. Even the trees stood unusually still. She walked to the edge of her home and looked up at the sky. Stars blinked down at her, unmoved. But her skin was tingling. Her heart beat with purpose. And the old woman's voice echoed in her ears. Asterisk, when the ground cracks, pour us in. Asterisk, what would crack? When? And why her? She looked back at the pot. For the first time, she understood that it was never just punishment. The pot was not a burden, it was a calling. A vessel for something ancient. A gift disguised as shame. She bent beside it, cupped her hands and took a sip. The water tasted of rain and wind and something more, like the first story ever told. As she lowered her hands, a breeze swept through the hut. A whisper trailed behind it. Asterisk, she remembers. Asterisk. The first day no one noticed. The well gave less water than usual, but no one worried. Perhaps the rope was tangled or the buckets had been pulled too fast. The second day the buckets scraped bottom. By the third the village began to murmur. Children returned from the well with empty gourds. Women argued over who had drawn too much. The men went to the spring Nia had visited daily, only to find it thin and sluggish, its once clear flow reduced to a muddy trickle. Crops yellowed at their edges. The air grew heavier, dust clinging to throats. Goats bleated in confusion, sniffing at dry troughs. The village of Umtalai, once lush and humming with green life, began to dry at its roots. But still Nia's pot brimmed with water. Every morning as she walked back from the spring with the same broken pot, her bare feet dusty and her arms trembling from the long journey, the pot remained full. Not a drop lost, not a shimmer gone. And people noticed. At first it was just glances, then whispers. She still carries water. I saw her yesterday, her pot didn't leak a single drop. How? Soon villagers began to follow her. They hid behind trees, crouched beside millet stalks, ducked under wide banana leaves. They watched her walk to the spring, kneel with the broken pot, and return with her water untouched by the sun or time. Some even ran down to the spring moments later, only to find it dry. It was not possible. But it was happening. By the end of the week they no longer whispered. They murmured openly. They stared. Even the girls who once laughed at her now stepped aside when she passed. Nia walked quietly, her eyes lowered, her pot clutched tightly against her chest. She could feel the pressure building, questions weighing heavier than the pot itself. In the village square, the elders gathered. Their voices were sharp, heavy with fear and uncertainty. "The drought has begun," declared one. "And yet this girl brings water. She walks the same path as the others, with a pot that should not hold a drop. She is no longer a child," another muttered. "Perhaps she is something else." Then the eldest among them, Jabari's father, raised his cane and struck it against the ground. "Witchcraft," he said. The word settled over the gathering like ash. She was given the cracked pot to shame her. Now the shame has become power. We must not be blind to signs. "But she harms no one," someone argued softly. "That is how it begins," the elders snapped. "Spirits favor her. That means they may turn against us." That night, word reached Nia. Mama Kalima came to her hut after sunset, her shawl pulled low, her face tense. "They've begun to speak of you," she said, placing a firm hand on the girl's shoulder. "The drought frightens them. And frightened people become dangerous." Nia sat quietly, the pot resting beside her like a companion. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she whispered. "I only walk, I only carry." "I know," Mama Kalima nodded. "But the elder's son watches you again. His pride hasn't healed. And his father listens to no reason when it comes to you." Outside, the wind picked up. It brushed against Nia's cheek, gentle like breath. "I don't understand why the water still comes to me," Nia murmured. "But I feel it wants something. Like it's waiting for something else to break." Mama Kalima looked at her long and hard. "Then be ready, child. Because once something breaks, nothing goes back to how it was." As night fell and the village prayed to empty wells, Nia lit no fire. She sat with the pot between her hands, her fingers tracing its cracks. And though no one saw her and no water was spilled, a single drop rolled down the side of the pot, like a tear from the clay itself. It happened just as the morning sun cracked over the hills, golden and sharp like judgment. Jabari stood at the head of a line of men, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw locked in fury. Behind him, the elder council had sent watchers, and curious villagers trailed along the path like leaves caught in a gust. They marched toward the spring, toward her. Nia was already there, crouched beside the smooth rocks, her fingers tracing the rim of the broken pot. The water flowed, soft and steady, its song muted beneath the weight of footsteps and suspicion. She felt the tension in the air before she heard it. "Stand up," Jabari barked. She rose slowly, her spine straight, her eyes calm. Her arms curled protectively around the pot. "You will pour it," he said, stepping forward. "Now. Before all of us." The others surrounded her, broad-shouldered men with sticks, with suspicion in their eyes. Even a few elders stood nearby, their faces like carved stone, watching for any flicker of guilt. Nia didn't move. "You claim no magic?" Jabari sneered. "Then pour it. Let us see what truly rests inside that pot you guard like a crown." There were murmurs from the crowd, sharp exhales, even some nods. They wanted her to fail. They wanted to see the truth exposed, either the pot dry or the water black with evil. Something explainable. Nia glanced toward Mama Kalima, who stood at a distance, her hands clenched tightly together. Then she looked beyond the crowd, to the trees that had bent for her, the animals that stepped aside, the path that changed for her steps. She took a breath and tipped the pot. The first splash was like a whisper. Then it gushed, cold, clear water spilling forth in a rush that stunned the silence. It struck the packed earth with a hiss, a sharp, honest sound that echoed like thunder. More water came. It didn't trickle. It flowed. It flooded over Jabari's sandals, splashing up to his knees. The other men stumbled back, stunned, as the spring behind Nia bubbled louder, swelling with sudden strength, as if awakened by the act. A stream burst from its base, rushing down the slope. Birds took flight. The dry bushes at the spring's edge suddenly bloomed with dew. The cracked earth drank greedily. The water, pure, beautiful, real, soaked the doubters to their bones. Gasps rose from the villagers. Someone whispered, "She didn't bring water. She is water." Jabari looked down, drenched, humiliated. His mouth opened, then closed. No insult came. No order. Just silence. Nia held the pot, now empty, its cracks shining in the sunlight. She looked at the men, not in triumph, not with hate, but with something deeper. Grace. Without a word, she turned her back to them and began walking away, her bare feet splashing through the puddles her pot had left behind. No one dared follow. Mama Kalima smiled softly as Nia passed. "The water knows," she whispered once more. Behind them, the spring roared with renewed life, its voice louder than any accusation. Night crept in with a restless wind. Jabari's rage had fermented all day. The village's whispers were louder than drums. Everywhere he turned, people spoke of Nia, the girl with the broken pot, the girl who poured rivers, the girl whose silence had drowned his lies. He waited until the village drifted into sleep. Then he slipped from his father's compound, face covered with a dark cloth, footsteps light on the damp earth. The moon was sharp above like a watchful eye, but Jabari ignored it. He moved quickly, a rusted blade tucked beneath his cloak. He found her hut easily, the one at the edge of the hill, where the grass grew strangely green and the wind always seemed to sing. He did not knock. He did not hesitate. Inside Nia slept. The broken pot stood beside her mat, its jagged mouth tilted slightly, as if it had been listening all night. Jabari clenched his jaw. "Let's see what your magic does without this," he hissed. He raised the blade and struck. Once, twice, again. Until the pot split further, until shards skittered across the floor like fleeing insects. Then he left, not running but walking, certain he'd buried her miracle. The next morning the village awoke to screaming. Water. Water everywhere. It poured from the sky, though no clouds had gathered. It gushed from the spring faster and faster, roaring like a beast unleashed. It burst through fences, swallowed paths, swept baskets and sandals and firewood into its surge. It leapt over thresholds, poured through windows, knocked over stools. The villagers ran, dragging children and goats, lifting mats and blankets. They shouted to the gods, to the ancestors, to each other. But the water did not listen. Except to one thing. It never touched Nia's hut. Even as the rest of the village drowned in waist-deep water, her home remained untouched. Not a single drop reached her doorstep. The earth around her home remained dry, warm, cracked like a desert, as if the flood feared her. And then she stepped out, barefoot, her eyes calm. The remains of the shattered pot were still beside her door, untouched by the flood. She didn't carry a new one. She didn't need to. She walked into the water and the water moved aside. Villagers stared from rooftops and trees, mouths agape. The wind carried silence, thick and holy. As Nia passed, the current parted, just enough for her steps. Not a hem of her dress got wet. People began to bow. One by one, heads dropped in reverence. Not out of fear but awe. Mama Kalima stood knee-deep in water, tears streaking her cheeks. "She is the pot," she whispered. "She always was." Even children fell to their knees, hands over their hearts. Only Jabari dared to watch without bowing, until the water licked at his chest, icy and furious. He sank to his knees, trembling. Nia said nothing. She simply walked past him, her path dry, her eyes forward. The flood continued around them, wild and unstoppable, until she reached the center of the village. Then it stopped. Just like that. The waters froze mid-motion, then slowly began to recede as if ashamed. Birds returned to branches. Leaves uncurled. The sun blinked out from behind the clouds. And Nia stood alone, dry, surrounded by a village that finally understood. It was never the pot. It was her. The village sat in stillness. What had once been a bustling morning of chores and children's laughter had transformed into quiet watching. People gathered under baobab trees, near rooftops, on the edges of drying puddles. Not even the birds dared sing. The flood had vanished as if it had never been, yet its memory clung to everything. The elders met beneath the sacred fig tree. Their faces were lined with years and now with shame. No one spoke for a long while. Only the sound of dripping water from rooftops filled the silence. Then Mama Kalima rose. Her eyes, sharp and silver as stormlight, scanned the faces before her. She leaned on her carved staff, the one passed down from healer to healer. It was damp, as if it too had stepped through the flood. "This child," she said, voice low but firm, "was mocked, cast out, given a broken pot. And yet, the water, the most sacred of all, obeyed her." Murmurs followed. "She walked dry while we drowned." The flood kissed her feet. She didn't scream. She never begged. She simply walked. Mama Kalima raised her hand. "She did not curse us. We cursed ourselves." Then she turned toward the spring. The village followed. It took only a few moments for the word to spread. Jabari was to stand judgment. They brought him from his father's hut, where he had hidden all morning. His eyes were swollen, his breath shallow. He tried to appear proud, chin raised, but the tremble in his hands betrayed him. When he saw the spring ahead, wide, shimmering under the returning sun, he froze. "No," he whispered. "You can't make me." But they did. 4 men, chosen by the elders, held him gently but firmly, guiding him to the water's edge. He tried to resist, but his feet felt heavy as if the ground itself wanted him to move forward. Mama Kalima stood beside the water. "The spirits have always lived here," she said. "They have quenched our thirst, fed our crops, danced with our children." She gestured toward Jabari. "Now they shall speak." The villagers formed a wide circle around the spring. Nia stood silently in the back, her face calm, her hands folded. She wore no jewelry, no grand cloth, only her humility and the earth's memory of her steps. Jabari was pushed forward, his toes just brushing the edge of the spring. "Step in," Mama Kalima said. He looked at her, then at the water. It shimmered. He stepped. The water pulled away. Gasps rose. He stepped again further, and again the water receded, curling back like a wave unwilling to touch him. He chased it. It fled. Wherever his foot tried to land, the water parted like a slithering snake. It was clear. The spring rejected him. Mama Kalima dropped to one knee and touched the earth. "They have spoken." The villagers, stunned, now turned their eyes to Jabari. He looked down at his feet, still dry despite standing at the center of the spring. For the first time he seemed small. His father, the elder, stepped forward. His face was ashen. "Son," he began, but words failed him. Mama Kalima's voice rose again. "By tradition, those rejected by the spirits must leave. Not in hatred but in cleansing. The land will mourn you but cannot carry your burden." Jabari fell to his knees, water now lapping at the hem of his trousers, still never touching skin. Tears streamed down his face. "I was afraid," he muttered. "Afraid of what she could do. Of what I wasn't." But it was too late for apologies. Two guards gently helped him to his feet. The path out of the village, once overgrown, now lay clear. He walked it alone. No one threw stones. No one cheered. Even Nia simply bowed her head. As he passed the final house, the wind blew, not cold but soft, brushing against his back like a farewell breath. The village turned once more to the spring. Mama Kalima faced Nia. "She carried water in a broken pot," she said, voice trembling now, "and not a drop was lost." A cheer did not rise. Instead, silence, deep, sacred, knowing. A silence full of gratitude. Because from this day on, the village understood, not all broken things are useless. And some girls are born not to fetch water, but to remind the world who it belongs to. Nia sat in the doorway of her small hut, the broken pieces of the old pot beside her. Someone had tried to sweep them away earlier, but she had asked them to stop. "Let them rest," she had said quietly. The shards still held stories. Every journey to the spring, every mocking laugh, every silent step under the morning sun. The villagers had come bearing gifts, a robe of fine blue cloth, a necklace of shells and a new water pot, thick, sturdy and carved from the same clay as the first. It glowed with fresh paint and praise. But Nia only smiled, thanked them and placed the pot on the ground beside the others. She did not reach for it. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the baobab trees stretched long shadows across the earth, she walked alone toward the hill. Past the old well. Past the edge of the path where grass had regrown in quiet forgiveness. She reached the tree, the one where her brother had once bled. The earth there was cracked, bruised with memory. But Nia knelt, pressed her hands into the soil and began to dig. She dug slowly, carefully, as if not to disturb the pain sleeping beneath. A few children from the village followed at a distance, whispering. One of them asked, "What is she doing?" But none had the courage to speak it aloud. Nia kept digging. Her fingers bled. Her arms ached. Then she paused. A dampness touched her wrist. The earth shivered, and water broke through. It was not a rush, not a flood, but a gentle rise, a weeping from beneath the ground. Clear, cool, soft. It curled into her palms. She did not move. The water moved with her. Behind her, Mama Kalima gasped. The children stepped forward. The birds sang again. She had not carried the water this time. This time, the water had come to her. The village gathered around the hole as it widened into a pool, the soil receding like old guilt. The water sparkled even in the fading light, and its surface hummed with something ancient. Mama Kalima fell to her knees and whispered, "Truth's mouth." That night, no one fetched water from the old spring. They came here in quiet reverence, barefoot. And they watched. Nia did not speak. She never claimed the spring as hers. But she sat beside it, hands resting on her lap, eyes reflecting the moon. When one of the children asked why she dug where she did, Mama Kalima answered for her. Because that is where truth bled. People began to visit her not just for water but for stories. They came with pain, with silence, with cracked voices and unsure hearts. They would kneel beside the spring and speak their truths, and somehow they felt lighter. The spring never dried. Not in drought. Not in storm. Not when hundreds came to it during the celebration of the new moon festival. It gave without question, without complaint. Just like the girl who once carried a broken pot. Elders debated what to call it. The well of mercy. The water that listens. But in the end, the name that stuck came from the lips of a child who had seen Nia's footsteps bend the path itself. Truth's mouth. And Nia? She stayed. She refused the elders' offer of a grand house. She refused the carved throne they brought. She asked only for a wooden stool and the freedom to walk. Some say that when she placed her bare feet into the spring for the first time, the water turned the color of dawn. Others say she vanished into it, not with her body but her spirit, and now the spring speaks in her voice on quiet nights. No matter what they believe, the villagers all agree on one thing. Nia did not carry the water. She became it. The sun rose slow over the village of Mbale, painting gold across the leaves and glinting off the quiet surface of the spring called Truth's Mouth. The water shimmered like silk, still and deep. Near its edge sat Nia, older now, her hair threaded with silver, her smile as soft as ripples. Children circled her, bare feet damp with dew. One, bolder than the rest, tugged gently on her robe. "Do you still remember the broken pot?" he asked. Nia didn't answer at first. She looked into the water. The reflection of her face wavered, blending with the sky above. A breeze passed over the spring and it hummed, low, melodic, like breath through hollow clay. Then she smiled. "I do," she whispered. "But the water remembers more than I do." The children leaned closer, eyes wide. She dipped her fingers into the spring. The moment her skin touched the surface, the water vibrated. Rings bloomed outward in perfect circles. A soft warmth filled the air, and the scent of rain on dust curled into their noses. "It remembers the path," she said. "The stones that bruised my feet. It remembers the cracks in the clay and the mornings I cried before anyone else was awake." The smallest child frowned. "How can water remember?" Nia looked up, her amber eyes catching the sunlight. "Water listens," she said. "And when it listens long enough, it learns. When it learns, it remembers. And when it remembers, it protects." The older girls had come with their mothers, carrying pots on their heads. They lined up at the spring, waiting for their turn. But before they filled their pots, they knelt and dipped their fingers in like Nia had taught them, greeting the spring, not taking from it. One by one they whispered names, names of babies in bellies, of loved ones lost, of hopes they dared not speak aloud. And the water shimmered back at them as if saying, "I heard you." Mama Kalima, now too old to walk without her cane, was helped to the edge of the spring. She sat beside Nia, shaking her head softly. "Still you sit here?" she murmured. "All these years? Not one day missed." Nia chuckled. "I'm not sitting here, Mama. I'm keeping watch." "For what?" "For memory. The world forgets too easily." Behind them, a girl of 12 accidentally dropped her pot. It cracked, a long line running down the side. She gasped, ready to cry, but Nia motioned her forward. "Fill it," she said. "But it's broken." "Fill it anyway." Tears brimming, the girl dipped the cracked pot into the spring. To everyone's quiet awe, not a single drop spilled as she carried it away. The children whispered. The women smiled. "It still listens," Mama Kalima said. "Even now." That night the sky turned indigo. The stars stretched wide. Nia sat alone, her feet in the spring, singing to it in low tones, not songs of power or prayer but lullabies. Stories wrapped in melody. Her memories spoken back into the water. And the spring hummed along. Villagers say that sometimes when the wind is right, you can hear Nia speaking even when she's silent. That if your pot is cracked and your heart heavy, the water will not just fill it, it will hold it tenderly. Years later, children still ask her, "Was it magic?" And she always answers the same, "It was remembering." The water remembered what truth felt like. It remembered silence. It remembered courage walking alone with a cracked pot and a bruised heart. And most of all, it remembered who listened. Nia, the girl who had once carried water the world thought she could not. Now she carried stories. And the water carried her. Years passed, and the village of Mbale, once known only for dust roads and drought prayers, became a place whispered of in distant markets. They came not to trade but to visit the spring, the one they called Truth's Mouth. Some came with cracked pots. Others came with broken hearts. And when they left lighter, as if the water had taken something heavy from their souls. Nia was no longer the girl mocked for carrying water in a shattered pot. She had grown, the lines at the corners of her eyes speaking softly of many seasons. But her presence had not dimmed. If anything, it deepened. She didn't walk quickly anymore, but when she entered a space, it was like a hush before the rain. Children loved her. They gathered near the spring at dusk, muddy-footed, faces lit by the orange glow of setting sun. She'd sit on a carved wooden stool, one hand dipping into the cool water, the other cradling a bowl of roasted groundnuts she shared without speaking. And always the question came. "Grandmother Nia," they'd ask, "do you still remember the broken pot?" At first she would smile. Then she would turn her gaze toward the water. The spring always responded, a shimmer across the surface, a swirl of motion like wind dancing beneath it. Sometimes the children swore it made a sound, not a splash or ripple but a hum. Like the pot that once refused to spill had learned to sing. "I remember," she'd say, her voice soft as moss. But more importantly, the water remembers. The youngest child would always ask, "How can water remember?" And Nia, as she always did, would dip her fingers into the spring, watching the tiny ripples stretch across the surface. "Because water listens," she would whisper. "It listens to pain, to truth, to the things we try to hide. And when it listens long enough, it remembers. That's what makes it sacred." The children would lean in closer, wide-eyed. "It remembered me," she said, "when the world chose to forget." In the background, women from the village knelt at the spring, washing their pots with care and reverence. It was no longer just a place for drawing water, it had become a place of healing, of prayer, of secrets shared with a force that never judged. Before filling their pots, the women would each touch the surface and murmur a name, not always their own. A lost child. A husband away at war. A mother gone to the next world. And always the water shimmered in response. Mama Kalima, though her back was bent and her voice raspy as dried leaves, still came every morning. She called Nia child of the clay, and often reminded others that the world had tried to break her spirit long before it broke her pot. "I watched you walk that path every day," she said once, sitting beside her. "The ground bent with you. The trees whispered. The birds followed. Even when no one stood beside you, the world did. The water did. And still does," Nia replied. Sometimes visitors came from other villages, messengers, storytellers, even scholars. They came to test the water. Some called it a trick, some sought to bottle it, and some simply sat beside it, crying without knowing why. The cracked pot, the one that started it all, was never repaired. When Jabari smashed it in anger, it had shattered into 4 perfect pieces. Nia had gathered them not with grief, but with gentleness. She placed them beside her sleeping mat and whispered, "Thank you." She buried them under a tree near her hut, one that hadn't bloomed in years. The next season, it gave flowers so wide and fragrant, people began calling it the Tree of Thirst. It never lost its green after that. Nia never carried another pot after that day. She didn't need to. When the village suffered another dry spell, the spring remained full. It never overflowed again as it once did, but it never receded either. Just like Nia, steady, quiet, deep. One afternoon, a girl named Tan came to the spring in tears. Her pot had cracked from a fall. She had no other. Her family would go without water. "Please," she begged, "let me borrow one." But Nia simply motioned her forward. "Use yours," she said. Tan hesitated. "But it leaks." "Then let it leak." With trembling hands, Tan dipped her cracked pot into the spring. And when she lifted it, her eyes widened. The water remained unmoved. Not a drop spilled. Not a line leaked. She ran all the way home shouting, "The water held." From that day it became a ritual. When a girl broke her pot, she didn't cry, she came to the spring. And the spring never refused. People began bringing stories instead of questions. They told of how when they walked with heavy burdens, the water whispered encouragement. How when they felt guilt or grief, it stayed calm until their hearts quieted. Even men who once mocked Nia knelt at its edge, asking for forgiveness without words. No one built a shrine. Nia never allowed it. "Don't worship what listened," she'd say. "Learn from it. Listen back." On the night of her 60th birthday, the villagers threw a celebration beside the spring. Fires were lit. Drums sang. Young girls performed a dance they called Steps in Silence, imitating the slow, deliberate walk of Nia during her punishment years. When they finished, Nia stood and raised a calabash. The entire crowd fell silent. "I am not special," she said. "I am not magic. I was broken. But the world made space for my cracks. And from them, truth flowed." She looked at the spring. "I was asked once if water could remember. But I believe this. When we walk with truth, the world bends to hold it. The path bends. The pot holds. Even silence becomes song. That night, the stars reflected in the spring like candles in a mirror. Some said they saw faces in the water, not spirits but memories. The next morning, a boy asked her if the spring would ever dry. Nia looked at him and replied, "Only when we forget." But no one did. Not when the droughts returned. Not when the rains failed. Not even when Nia, old and tired, was finally carried to her mat and no longer rose. She didn't leave a will. She didn't need to. The cracked pot remained buried. The spring remained full. And on her grave, they placed a flat stone with words carved deep by children who once sat at her feet. The water remembers, and so do we.